I wanted to ask you, both coming from an anthropology background and also coming from like a biology and geneticist background, what is your opinion on gender?
I have been
and like also from like a human background,
or even just like what's the difference between gender and sex? You know?
Yeah, so I've been in a lot of internet fights about this. And I believe the opinion of sort of the scientific consensus, sex and gender, first of all, are different. Sex, and a term that we sort of used to use a lot and bandy about, was biological sex. We don't use that as much anymore. We use defined at birth. That tends to refer to sort of the way that we categorize sex generally. That also can be a little bit complicated. Mostly people think about that as like, you know, a baby's born, we look at their genitalia and we decide boy, girl, and that's your sex assigned at birth. Obviously, genetically speaking, that can be a bit more complicated. There's a lot of various ways your genetics can alter that. For example, so one of the weird things about sex is that genetically, the parts of the X and Y chromosome, well, the X chromosome that define sex and the Y chromosome. So, okay, rolling back, the X and Y chromosome, right? They have to recombine. Every chromosome in your cell has to recombine in order for cells to divide. You've probably heard about like mitosis, meiosis, right? In like grade school, and haven't really thought about it since, which is understandable. Not something that you would ever
Accurate.
think about. But all the chromosomes sort of do this little dance where they line up, they do some recombination, and they divide for meiosis, right? The thing is all the other chromosomes are identical copies of each other, right? You have 2 1 chromosomes, 2 2s, 2 3s, whatever, all the way down the line. The X and Y, I don't know if you've ever seen like a karyotype where they visualize all the chromosomes. The Y is like the smallest goddamn thing. And it's like, it is actually falling apart. Like the Y chromosome is slowly degrading because it doesn't really recombine. Like most of it doesn't do anything. There's very few genes on it. It's the smallest, littlest, tiniest chromosome. The X chromosome is goddamn huge. It does a ton of work because everyone has to have one. You can't survive without an X chromosome, right? Men have an X and a Y. Women have 2 X's, and women, in fact, in almost every cell in your body, one of those 2 X's is silenced completely because your cells would freak the fuck out if you had genes from both X's being expressed at once because there's so much going on in the X chromosome. So, and that's a whole nother story. But the point being is now in men, you have this tiny, dinky little Y chromosome and this massive X chromosome. They're supposed to line up and recombine, and that's pretty weird. And the way that they know to recombine is that the very top edges of them are pretty similar to each other. And so those 2 little top, the X chromosome like fully folds in half to like recombine with the Y. And so those edges that actually recombine with each other are called pseudo-autosomal regions because they sort of resemble the rest of the chromosomes because they recombine. What is very close to the pseudo-autosomal regions is a gene called SRY, and that determines like basically the entire pathway that leads to external male genitalia. And because it's so close to that crossover region, there's actually like a insignificant chance that can occasionally cross over onto the X. So you can have XX chromosomes and have external male genitalia. So how people want to define sex is even sort of a little bit confusing. You're going to be like, oh, well, it's your chromosomes. Right. Or you're going to be like, oh, it's whether or not you have a dick, which, a lot of people seem to sort of ignore the female genitalia. It's really all down to do you have a penis or not. Men are very focused on penises, I've found.
Surprisingly so.
Yeah, it's weird.
I mean, they're kind of cool.
I suppose,
as someone
but you don't see women
as someone
like
who's played with a strap-on plenty, yeah, it's great to have a dick, but like, it's not a requirement.
It's definitely not overrated. Just anyway,
it might be overrated.
It's a little overrated.
In any case, the point of this sort of elongated, weird story is that, like, even if you think about just how we define sort of sex assigned at birth, that is not a sort of a distinct binary. You can very easily have these sort of complicated situations where like your external, how we define sex and sort of internal chromosomal ways we define sex differ. And that just sort of ramps up extremely when you get into things like gender, which is not something that is biologically defined in any way. It is something that is sort of culturally defined, personally defined. And that is sort of how you perceive your external presentation of gender to society. And that's going to be based to large part like how society defines gender around you, and how you understand gender and sex within yourself. And that's going to be a very personal choice, obviously. But point being is that even if you want to like get angry and aggro and talk about like, oh, well, science says there's only boys and girls, science does not say that. Science that, like everything else, gender and sex and all of it exists along a spectrum, and people need to really get off the internet is my conclusion.
That was the most perfect answer to that question. Like, especially like from a science perspective, because it's like, oh, well, yeah. I love how a lot of people say, oh, you know, in nature, like homosexuality doesn't exist in nature. It does. I love how people say that like multiple genders don't exist in nature. They do. So like even within just like humanity itself, multiple genders exist both on a chromosomal.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, level and like biological level and like a presentation level. So like there are multiple levels of gender in your expression of them, both through like your societal expression of them and like just fucking your chromosomes saying,
yeah, I mean, and you can say that like in various, you know, in humans or in animals or whatever, like that population that sort of defies the way that we like to binarize things is small, but that doesn't really matter, because what you can also think of is that there's probably a lot of bleed in from the sides. It's not like there's two fucking like boxes and then there's a few people that sort of scatter themselves into the middle. That's just not how biology works. Like look at any trait. Like things don't humans are particularly good at making patterns, and it's probably helped us to evolve and survive, but we really like to box things in ways that don't always make a lot of sense. And we've done this with how we sort of understand race too, which is also culturally defined and is not consistent from place to place. But it's weird because you can imagine other ways we could have done it. And it, you know, we could have done it based on weird bits of eye color, like all blue-eyed people are in one race, or we could have done it based on blood group, a bit harder to define, but we could have done that and be like all O group people are. There's just random and arbitrary ways that you can choose to group people, and in America we group people in very odd ways because we group it based on sort of a bizarre understanding of like slight differentiations in skin color, and just say everyone who's not a fucking ghost goes into this box. You know, but that matters too, because that becomes a lived experience once we create this culture. And the same thing is true for gender, right? Like it doesn't matter if we're wrong in how we define femininity, which I think we are, but because our culture understands what it means to be a woman in that way, that's going to change how people like choose to like align themselves in things. And I mean, I think there's probably a reason why we see a lot more bisexual women than men, for one example. And I think that's probably because it is a lot more culturally acceptable for women to be more in the middle of that spectrum and be more exploratory than it is for men to be. Men are sort of, in my opinion, forced to sort of sit in binary bins a lot more.
They're either gay or straight. And even when they're bisexual, they're labeled as gay.
Yeah. I mean, and women who are bisexual are typically labeled as straight, but we're given a little more leeway, I think.
It's like straight, but like you occasionally kiss girls. But like if you're bi, it's like, are you bi though? Are you actually bi? Do you really like women? Or do you just like to kiss girls sometimes at the bar? Remember when you could like kiss girls at the bar and not have to worry about dying?
Could kiss one at a bar? Oh my God. Remember bars?
Oh my God.
Is it fair to say that sex is referring to kind of like the biology and gender is referring to the psychology?
I wouldn't phrase it that way. I mean, I think you're getting...
What's wrong about that phrasing?
Okay. Well, saying sex is referring to biology is a little weird because it sort of implies that like, because usually when people say sex, they're going to say like male or female. Right? They're going to follow that up with one of those two.
But you've explained how the biology doesn't necessarily have to be binary.
I understand that, but I also explained how like culture sort of defines how things are, and it doesn't matter if that's true or not. It still affects people's lived experiences, right? So if people are going to follow up sex with biology and then with male or female, that sort of reinforces the notion that biological sex is a thing. It's a binary thing, and it is sort of a permanent thing that is defined by your biology, and you can't change it, and that's what it is. And I think that can be a harmful claim. And I know that like we can understand that differently, and so like maybe for us we can think about it that way, and that would be okay. But I think sort of, I mean, and like I said, as a geneticist, as a biologist, we have to think really carefully about how you communicate ideas to everyone else, because people are going to take that differently.
Right.
So I would say, you know, the difference to me is there is sex assigned at birth, and that is sort of based on sort of the cultural understanding of how we just put, you know, M or F on a birth certificate. There is that. And then there is gender, which is how a person comes to understand their relationship with sort of the ideas of gender in their individual culture. And I don't know that you can make a claim about that until a person is like an adult enough person to be a person and have ideas about that.
Right.
And I don't necessarily say that that's psychology either, because to me, psychology also implies something a little bit innate. And maybe that's just my misunderstanding of the term psychology. But I think, you know, gender is very much comes from like an interaction with the culture and an understanding of yourself, and how you feel that you fit into a given cultural context.
Right. That makes sense.
But psychology to me is also a dangerous term when we talk about gender, especially gender diversity, because, you know, there's a long and storied history of psychologists defining anything outside of the norm as being an actual disorder. I mean, it was extremely recently that being gay at all was not defined as
what was the term? There was a term for it. There was like a psychological, clinical, like term for being gay.
It depended on whether you were a male who was gay or a female who was gay, because a female who was gay had, what was it? Not lesbos. It's Sappho, right? You were like had sapphic tendencies.
Nice.
And
which I kind of love
would
to be able to keep that.
I mean, I'm about that life, but like you would be lobotomized for it. So
yeah.
I mean, you'd mostly be lobotomized for being a woman who thought too much back in the day. So.
Oh my God, you had emotions. You spoke back to your husband. Lobotomy.
Or what was the other treatment for it? The other treatment was they masturbated you. What was that?
Oh yeah,
the lobotomy. Those were the good days,
right?
Those were the good days. That was because you had quote unquote wandering utrus.
Wandering uterus is my hysteria. Yeah.
Or hysteria. Hysteria.
Yeah.
I love that. Like the treatment for hysteria is freaking masturbation.
Well, it wasn't even masturbation. It was actually like
or electrocution.
Yeah, like electrocution, lobotomy, or
all things that you love. Maybe not lobotomy, but
I mean, I do love myself some electricity. But like stimulating the clitoris, which was also really interesting because that's how the first vibrator was invented.
Of course,
and
it's a cure for hysteria.
I know, but like it is not lost on me that the Hitachi magic wand looks distinctly similar to the very first vibrator.
I mean, they got it
when you got it right. When you got it right, you got it right.
And like Hitachi was like, this is a back massager. And everyone was like, sure, Jan, sure.
I mean, I suspect all the people that like got to go to their doctors and be like, I'm hysterical, and then get like a free masturbation.
Oh yeah, well that became like a thing where like women like would like check themselves in and be like, I'm hysterical, because like their doctor was like doing it better than their husband.
Right, their doctor was the only one getting them off.
Their husband was doing it, you know.
Right, their husband wasn't doing anything at all. Their husband was just like, I'm gonna like use you as a fuck doll, and then they'd be like, this is
find the
worst
for the first time. When did anyone even read that term? I don't know that.
Well, I mean, even in like modern day society, we still don't know a whole lot about the clitoris. Like we just found out like within the last like 10 years that the clitoris is like a huge fucking organ, and like is like the outside presentation of it is like the tiniest part of it, and like the clitoris
tip of the iceberg.
Right. So like the G spot is actually part of the clitoris on the inside, and like it's a whole like fucking thing.
It sort of branches up.
Yeah. We're going to have to show visualizations of this because it like literally the way that the clitoris.
Be very surprised.
Yeah, the way the clitoris works. So like on the outside, it's just like this tiny little like nub, but on the inside, it literally like looks like this, going over the top of like the top wall of the vagina. So like it's just like this big, huge, like branching thing, and so you can stimulate the top of it from the inside, which is why some women actually really enjoy internal stimulation, because it's rubbing against their clitoris. But it's also like a lot of women prefer external stimulation because the like tiny little knob or whatever on the outside has a lot more nerve endings.
Right.
So external stimulation tends to be more pleasurable than internal stimulation, but like that internal stimulation is still stimulating the clitoris.
That's so interesting. So it's part of the same organ.
Yes.
Oh yeah, it's wild.
Wow.
Very large.
Welcome to sex education.
Wow. We should do a whole episode. How to find the clit with Vivica.
Honestly, I would absolutely do
With
an
Vivica
entire
Volt.
I would do an entire episode about the clitoris and like how
I need to be there in person for that. I feel like I want to just surround John and be like, so listen. What does that mean with all the strings?
So it's like, okay, so over here you've got this, and like over here you've got that. No, absolutely. Because like there's so many different ways that like there's so many different types of orgasms. And that's one of the things that like even now in like our current understanding of modern medicine, we still don't like really know everything there is to know about the female orgasm. Like we are just now understanding that there are at least 4 different types of orgasms that you can have. So you can have an external stimulation orgasm, you can have an internal stimulation orgasm, you can have a G-spot orgasm, or you can have an anal orgasm. And all of those different things are
Women can have anal orgasms?
Absolutely, women can have anal orgasms. That's a total thing. Like, I mean, men can obviously have prostate orgasms, and that's like literally hitting the male G-spot, and like that orgasm is clutch. But like there are at least 4 different types of female bodied orgasms that we currently know of, but like 2 of them are literally hitting because they're hitting the same organ.
Why did God give us all of these ways of
Fuck you, John.
orgasming if we aren't supposed to
Fuck
play with them?
you, John. I'm not even gonna let you finish that stupid statement.
I mean, hey, it's kind of a gotcha for religion. Like, how do they explain that?
Well, first of all, religion doesn't think that.
They
Okay,
think
so
the devil put the clitoris there, John. That's
The
why.
Right, which is-
the devil. I
right,
love the
which is
devil.
also why you
The
have a
devil's
whole.
kind of cool.
I mean, honestly, he and I would get along. Like, is he single? Like, where's he at though? But like, that's also how you have a lot of cultures that engage in female genital mutilation,
Right.
because they think that like a woman having sexual pleasure is evil
Haram.
in some sort of capacity, because technically only men are supposed to be able to have pleasure from sex, and that's stupid. And
Again, like we talked about, diversity of opinion
Right.
when it comes to
There
making
was
these
no
decisions.
women in the
If
room.
women were in the room being involved in that decision
they
making
would have been
process,
like,
that shit would never fly. So
excuse
that's
me.
why diversity is so important.
Yeah, I was gonna say, circling back to weirdly to what we were talking about earlier, like part of the reason we don't know much about female sexuality, female genitalia, all of that, is that there is not a lot of funding to be had to study like female predominant issues. Like even
Right.
in my personal experience, I know of people trying to get funding to study bulimia, anorexia, and these are they're not female specific, but they're female predominant problems, and there's just
Correct.
a lot less funding for that than other diseases. And I don't know, maybe there's less funding for male specific diseases too. I somehow doubt it.
I doubt that, because I mean, we have Viagra on the fucking market. Like literally, like a couple guys were like, I can't get my dick hard, and we immediately had a pill for it. So like I feel like the funding for male specific issues goes through very fucking quickly and happens almost instantaneously. And like,
Well, because generally speaking, over history, it's been men reviewing the funding for these kinds of things and basically approving or denying it. And you look at Congress even.
And it's not that simple anymore, right? Like women perpetuate sexism.
a lot of
things.
things.
It's built
Amy
into,
Coney Barrett,
Well, right, for sure. Interesting.
yeah. So
because women
Yeah.
can perpetuate misogyny too.
But at the end of the day, when you increase diversity within the population of people who are making decisions, you bring, perspectives to the table that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And that's what's so important.
Right.
Well, you start bringing enough loud people like Alicia and me in, then eventually.
Exactly.
Yes. So basically, put Olivia and I on any board.
Hooray.
Thanks for checking out this clip from our show.
To watch more clips or full episodes, click on our profile below.
If you want to stay up to date on all of our new episodes and videos, click subscribe.
And if you have any ideas for future guests or topics that you would like to see us cover on the show,
leave us a message in the comments or connect with us on any of our social media channels at Funtime Program.
Or on our website at funtimeprogram.com.
We'll see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.